Okay. So you know how it is these days, right? Like you want to learn, you want to stay on top of things, you want to be informed, but it's like drinking from a fire hose,
Yeah.
there's just too much information coming at you all the time.
Right. It's overwhelming.
So that's where we come in. We're going to try to give you a deep dive on some really important topics, give you the info you need without making you feel like you're going to drown, right?
Yeah.
And today we are diving deep into a really vital topic. It's understanding the signs, those signals that our minds and bodies might be sending us, when things aren't quite right with our mental well-being.
Like those little red flags that we sometimes miss.
Exactly. So think of this deep dive as your crash course, your cheat sheet, whatever you want to call it, into understanding mental health warning signs. And you don't need a medical degree or anything like that to get it.
Nope. We've done the homework for you. We've looked at everything from the official stuff from the WHO, the World Health Organization, to what experts at the American Psychiatric Association are saying, and even what everyday folks are talking about in those online communities.
We're getting that full spectrum.
Yeah, the whole picture.
And our mission today is pretty simple: to equip you, to give you some clear, down-to-earth, practical knowledge so that you can recognize potential mental health challenges. And this is important whether you're thinking about yourself or maybe someone you care about.
Someone you love.
Exactly.
Right.
And we're going to try to make this relatable, easy to grasp, no matter what your background is.
No matter who you are, where you come from.
Right. Now, one big takeaway that just jumped out at us from looking at all this research, all these different sources,
Across the board.
is that spotting these signs early can be a real game changer.
Huge.
And getting support, reaching out for help, that's key.
It really can make all the difference.
So to kick things off, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly do we mean by mental health and mental illness? Like, where do we even begin?
Right. Well, the World Health Organization, the WHO, gives us a pretty good foundation, a starting point, I guess. They say that when we talk about mental disorders, we're talking about real problems, not just everyday ups and downs,
Right.
but actual problems with how we think, with how we manage our emotions, and how we behave.
So like the way we act.
Exactly. And these problems often cause a lot of distress, a lot of suffering for the person going through it, and they can really make it hard to handle daily life.
To go to school, to have a job, to have relationships.
And all of that. So it goes beyond just feeling a little down in the dumps for an afternoon, you know what I mean?
Right. We all have those days.
Yeah.
It's not like feeling bummed out for a couple of hours because you had a tough day.
No. We're talking about something more persistent.
Okay, so that's mental disorders.
Mm.
But the WHO also talks about mental health conditions,
Mm-hmm.
right? What does that mean?
Right. And mental health conditions is a much broader term. It's kind of like that big umbrella term, It includes those mental disorders we were just talking about, but it also includes psychosocial disabilities and other mental states where somebody might be feeling really, really distressed or be at risk of harming themselves or others.
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack. But what really struck me was how common these experiences are.
Right.
Like how many people are actually affected by these challenges. The WHO, in their data from 2019.
Which feels like forever ago, but
It does.
It does. But their data from 2019 showed that about 1 in 8 people around the world at that time were living with a mental disorder.
1 in 8. That's a lot of people.
That's a huge number of people.
Mm.
And then you throw the COVID-19 pandemic into the mix. I mean, think about it. Suddenly everyone's isolated, worried about getting sick, maybe facing financial stress, jobs disappearing.
Uncertainty everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. And all that really messed with people's mental well-being. And we saw a really big jump in anxiety and depression during that time.
Like it was already a pretty big problem.
Huge problem.
And then the pandemic came along
Delta
and
made it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the WHO's early estimates from 2020, just a year into the pandemic, showed that anxiety disorders had gone up by like 26%, and major depressive disorders increased by 28%. There's like this huge spike.
Yeah, it's pretty alarming, right? And I think that just shows how important it is that we learn about these warning signs we're going to be talking about today. Because, you never know when you or someone you love might be facing these challenges.
Absolutely. Okay, so with that bigger picture in mind, let's dive into those common warning signs, the things that we saw coming up again and again in all this information we were looking at. And I think it's helpful to break them down by theme, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So the first category is changes in mood.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's kind of like the core, right?
Like the foundation.
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Well, a lot of these organizations, like Rosecrance, the American Psychiatric Association, They all point to these rapid, really dramatic shifts in emotions, those mood swings. Like, that's a big red flag that something might be off.
So it's not your typical, I'm happy one minute, then I'm a little bit sad the next. It's more intense than
They're
that.
way more intense, yeah.
And from what we saw in the online discussions, like on Reddit and in other communities, as well as information from places like Everyday Health, Mentes Abiertas, they all mention that prolonged sadness, depression that sticks around for more than a couple of weeks. That's a huge warning sign.
Yeah, that's not something to ignore.
It's like that feeling of heaviness that just won't go away no matter what you do. And Mentes Abiertas also talked about this constant feeling of being overwhelmed, which I think, honestly, a lot of people can relate to that, especially teenagers, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They've got school and social lives and so much going on. So how do we know, like, when does that feeling of being overwhelmed cross the line into a real warning sign?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to how often and how intensely you feel overwhelmed, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Like, is it every day? Is it all the time?
Yeah.
And how much is it affecting your everyday life? Can you still function? Or is it so bad that you can't focus on anything? You can't even get out of bed? That's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And another thing we saw a lot was, increased irritability, like a really short fuse, or having these emotional outbursts where you just lose your cool over things that wouldn't normally bother you.
Right, right. Like you're snapping at everyone around you.
Exactly. And we saw that in Everyday Health, Health Direct, Mentes Abiertas, a bunch of different sources were talking about that.
Yeah, so irritability, getting angry easily. And then on the flip side, Health Direct actually mentioned extreme euphoria, like feeling excessively high,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting because that might not be what people typically think of when they're thinking about mental health challenges.
Right.
But it's like if you're feeling super, super up for a prolonged period of time, that could also be a sign that something's off balance.
Absolutely.
Okay, so mood changes, we've got to watch out for that. What's another big warning sign?
Another one that kept popping up over and over again was social withdrawal and loss of interest. Like, you just lose interest in the things you used to love, the things that used to bring you joy.
Right.
And this was something that Rosecrans talked about, the APA, Health Direct, Mentes Abiertas, like everybody was talking about this. It's like a noticeable shift, Someone who used to be very social, very outgoing, suddenly starts pulling away from friends and family. Or they used to have hobbies, they used to love doing certain activities, and now they just don't care anymore.
Like that friend who is always playing video games, suddenly they don't want to touch their console. Or someone who loved going to parties every weekend, suddenly they just want to stay home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Rosecrans and the APA also mentioned this more general feeling of being disconnected. And they talked about it in two ways. Disconnected from yourself, like you just don't feel like yourself anymore. And disconnected from your surroundings, like things don't feel real, almost like you're in a dream.
Whoa.
Yeah, it can get pretty intense.
Okay, so those are some pretty serious signs. And then Health Direct also mentioned simply becoming more quiet or withdrawn, even if it's not, like total isolation.
Right. It doesn't have to be extreme.
It's just like noticeable, right, the noticeable change.
Yeah, like you can tell something's different.
Okay, so if you see someone who's usually pretty outgoing,
Yeah.
suddenly they're being a lot more isolated. It could be more than just like needing some alone time, right?
Yeah, it might be a good idea to check in with them, see how they're doing.
Absolutely. Okay, what's our next category?
So next, let's talk about changes in functioning, like how someone's doing in their day-to-day life. This was something that a lot of sources mentioned, like Rosecrans, the APA, Health Direct. They all talked about an unusual drop in performance, like at school, at work, even in social situations.
So it's like someone's grades start slipping or someone who used to be really reliable at their job starts messing up.
Exactly, yeah. Or, like quitting sports teams, suddenly having trouble with the tasks that used to be really easy for them.
Wow.
Yeah. Rosecrans specifically mentioned that. It's not just like a one-time slip-up. It's a pattern, like a clear decline in their ability to handle the things they normally do.
So the things they used to be able to do without a problem.
Right. And Health Direct mentioned neglecting responsibilities, which I think is a big part of this.
Like forgetting to do your homework or chores or showing up late all the time.
Yeah, all of that. And it's not like they're being lazy. It's like they just don't have the energy, the motivation to keep up with things.
Right, right.
And that's often tied to their mental state.
Okay, so we've got mood, we've got social engagement, we've got how they're functioning in their daily lives. What else should we be looking out for?
Okay, next up, we've got difficulties in thinking. This one's a little harder to spot sometimes. but it's really important.
Okay, so what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, Rosecrans, the APA, and Mentes Abiertas all talked about persistent problems with concentration,
Okay.
problems with memory, or even just thinking clearly.
Like brain fog.
Yeah, like brain fog.
Oh,
You're having trouble communicating your thoughts.
right.
It's hard to follow conversations. You forget things easily. Your thoughts are jumbled. It can be really frustrating.
And Mentes Abiertas mentioned frequent forgetfulness and having trouble remembering even basic information, which honestly, that could be pretty scary if it's happening to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It can be really unsettling.
So it's one thing to, like, forget where you put your keys. It's another thing to forget, like, what you had for breakfast this morning.
Right. And then on top of that, Rosecrans and the APA mentioned what they called magical or illogical thinking, like holding on to beliefs that are really out of touch with reality.
Okay, so that's different from, like, having an active imagination.
Yeah, this isn't about being creative or having a wild imagination. This is about believing things that just don't make sense, that aren't based in reality. And they also mentioned heightened nervousness, like being afraid all the time or suspicion of others, like thinking people are plotting against you when there's no reason to believe that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it can get pretty intense.
So, like, if someone starts thinking that their friends are secretly talking about them behind their back, even though there's no evidence for it,
Exactly.
yeah, okay, that's tough.
It's really hard.
Okay, so we've got difficulties in thinking, and then something that can also really impact how we feel is changes in sleep and appetite.
Oh, for sure. That's huge.
Yeah, like I know when I don't sleep well or when I eat too much or too little, it messes with my mood.
Oh, totally. I'm the same way.
So what kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about those big swings in your sleep patterns. Like, you might have insomnia, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, or you might sleep way more than usual. And then there's appetite. You might suddenly lose your appetite and not be interested in food, or you might start eating way more than usual even when you're not hungry.
Right, right.
And those things were mentioned by a bunch of different sources. Rosecrans, the APA, Everyday Health, Health Direct, Mentes Abiertas, they all talked about it.
So it's not just like having a bad night's sleep before a big test.
Yeah.
Or like not feeling hungry when you're super stressed about something. It's a pattern, right?
Right. It's a consistent change from your normal habits.
Okay. And then Rosecrans, the APA, they also mentioned a decline in personal care or hygiene.
Yeah.
Like when someone stops showering regularly, brushing their teeth, basic stuff.
Yeah.
That can be a sign that something's up.
It can be. And it's not because they're lazy or anything. It's often because they just don't have the energy, the motivation to take care of themselves. It can be really hard when you're struggling mentally.
Yeah, yeah.
And then another sign we saw mentioned by Rosecrans and the APA was increased sensitivity. So this is like becoming more easily overwhelmed by things like bright lights, loud noises, strong smells, even physical touch.
Okay.
And as a result, they might start avoiding situations that could trigger those sensitivities.
Like going to a concert or to a party.
Yeah, or even just going to school or hanging out in crowded places. It can make everyday life pretty challenging.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then we also saw apathy and loss of initiative as potential warning signs. This is when someone just loses that spark. They don't have the motivation to do anything, to participate in any kind of activity.
Okay.
Rosecrans and the APA, they both talked about this. And it's different from just feeling lazy. It's a real lack of drive, a lack of interest in life.
And that can be really hard to watch if it's someone you love.
Yeah.
To see them just kind of shut down like that.
It can be really tough. And it's important to remember that these things are often connected. Like those changes in sleep and appetite, the social withdrawal, the loss of interest, they can all be signs of a deeper mental health challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes mental health challenges can even manifest in physical ways, can't they?
Absolutely. And that's something a lot of people don't realize. Everyday Health talked about how depression, for example, can sometimes cause physical symptoms like headaches or digestive problems.
So like ongoing headaches, stomach issues.
Yeah. And in online forums, we saw people talking about how they get stomach aches when they're anxious.
Oh, yeah.
So there's definitely a connection between our minds and our bodies.
For sure.
And if someone's having those physical symptoms all the time and the doctors can't find a physical cause,
Right.
it might be worth looking into whether there's a mental health component.
Okay, so that's a good reminder. And then Everyday Health and Health Direct both mentioned those feelings of excessive guilt or worthlessness.
Right.
And that's not just feeling bad after you make a mistake. It's a deeper thing.
It's more like a core belief that they're a bad person, that they're not good enough.
Right.
And they believe this even when there's no real reason to feel that way.
Yeah. And that kind of negative self-talk can be really damaging.
Oh, it can be so destructive.
And then there's substance abuse, which Health Direct and Opportunity Outreach talked about. Turning to things like drugs or alcohol to cope with difficult emotions, that can be a big sign that something's wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
And, of course, using substances can also make existing mental health problems worse.
Right. It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah. And, we need to talk about something that's incredibly serious, something that requires immediate attention.
Absolutely. And that's suicidal thoughts or threats of suicide. And Rosecrans, Health Direct, the APA, and Opportunity Outreach all mention this. If someone's talking about wanting to die, wanting to hurt themselves,
Or even, expressing that they don't want to be around anymore.
yeah, any of that, you have to take it seriously.
Absolutely.
Even if you think they're just saying it for attention, you have to get help.
You can't take any chances.
No. And the same goes for any thoughts of harming others.
Right.
These are emergencies, and they need immediate professional help.
Okay. So what's our last category of warning signs?
The last one is kind of a catch-all category.
Huh.
Unusual behavior and thoughts. It's basically any behavior or thoughts that are really different from how someone normally acts or thinks.
Okay.
So the APA mentioned odd, uncharacteristic behavior, and Health Direct mentioned bizarre or strange thoughts like believing they have special powers or feeling like their thoughts are being controlled by someone else.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about changes in mood, behavior, difficulties with thinking, physical symptoms, even thoughts of suicide. That's a lot of information. But, I think it's really important to remember that seeing one or two of these things on their own, it doesn't automatically mean someone's having a mental breakdown, right?
No, not at all. And Health Direct and the ATA both made that point. A lot of these signs can be normal, or they could be due to other things that are going on in someone's life.
Like stress at school, or problems at work, or relationship troubles.
Exactly.
So it's about the bigger picture
It's about looking at the whole person.
and noticing if there's a pattern.
Right. Are there several of these signs happening at the same time?
Okay.
And are they lasting for more than a couple of weeks?
Because, we all have bad days.
Of course.
But if it's going on for a while, then maybe it's time to reach out.
Yeah. And a bunch of sources mention that timeline, like 2 weeks or more.
Okay.
Rosecrans, Everyday Health, Health Direct, the APA, they all said something similar.
Okay, so we're looking for a pattern of changes, and we're looking for a significant shift from how someone normally is.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to a really crucial point. Early intervention and getting help.
Right.
All the research points to this, Getting support early can make such a big difference.
It can change the course of things, right?
Absolutely. It can help prevent things from getting worse.
Okay.
And Rosecrans, the APA, and Opportunity Outreach, they all really emphasize that.
So it's kind of like, catching a health issue early before it turns into something really serious.
Exactly.
And Everyday Health said that a lot of mental health conditions, even things like major depression, are treatable.
Yeah.
So there's hope.
Absolutely. There's always hope.
So if you recognize any of these signs in yourself or in someone you care about, the most important thing you can do is reach out to a mental health professional.
Yes.
They're the experts. They can help.
They can give you an accurate diagnosis,
Yeah.
And they can recommend the right kind of support, the right kind of treatment.
Right.
And it's important to say this again. In those really urgent situations, like when someone's talking about suicide or hurting themselves or others,
Right.
you got to get help immediately. Call a crisis hotline. Call 911, whatever you need to do.
Don't hesitate.
Don't wait.
Okay, well, this has been a really intense deep dive into something that honestly affects all of us in one way or another.
It really does.
The big takeaway here is that recognizing these mental health signs, that's the first step. It's
Absolutely.
the first step towards getting support, towards getting help, and ultimately towards living a healthier, happier life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And we really hope that this has been helpful for you, that this has given you a clearer understanding of these really important indicators.
And for all of you listening, I want to leave you with a question.
Yeah.
What's one small thing you can do, starting today, to be more aware?
Right. To be more supportive.
Yeah.
For yourself and for the people around you. It can be a small thing. It doesn't have to be a huge gesture.
Just something to start with.
That's a powerful thought. And, if you found this deep dive valuable and you want us to keep exploring topics like this,
Important stuff.
yeah, please subscribe to our channel. That way, you won't miss out.
We'd love to have you join us.
And if you have any thoughts, any questions about mental health awareness, Or if anything we talked about today really resonated with you,
Hit that like button.
hit that like button, leave a comment below. We want to hear from you.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Until next time.
See you then.